Hi, it's Rory Darkins here, and I'm really looking forward to presenting the upcoming live stream, Positive Sports Psychology, Cultivating Deep Wellbeing. In this live stream, we'll be covering what wellbeing is and how we measure it. We'll be looking at the links between wellbeing and sustainable high performance. We'll identify practical, science-based strategies to optimize wellbeing, and we'll have a Q&A in order to answer your questions to help you build deep wellbeing for yourself and others in your life. It's on Saturday the 10th of September and tickets are available now. Would love to see you there.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to episode 336 of the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Polar's new generation running watches, the Polar Pacer Pro and the Polar Pacer, and our upcoming live stream event, September the 10th, 3 to 6 p.m, Australian Eastern Standard Time, Positive Sports Psychology, Cultivating Deep Wellbeing with sports psychology researcher Rory Darkins. I'm Brad Beer, sports and exercise physiotherapist by trade and training and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. And of course we do this across a range of our different episodes, interest editions, coaches' corners, featured performers, learnings catch-up episodes, and expert editions. And off the back of the weekend just gone's incredible Commonwealth Games female and male marathon Australian performances, we thought it was timely that we rewired Adam Didyk, 2022 Birmingham Commonwealth Games gold medalist coach to Jessica Stenson, knee Trengove, to revisit some of his coaching philosophies that he shared with us back on episode 120. There are so many learnings to be had from Adam's sharings. By way of bio, Adam is head coach of Team Tempo Run, an elite running squad based in South Australia. Adam has been an Athletics Australia Coach of the Year nominee in 2016 and 17, and the Athletics South Australia Coach of the Year in 2011 and 2012. Adam's squad boasts some of Australia's best running talent, including the now Commonwealth Games champion, Jessica Stenson. Jessica featured also back on episode 34 and episode 272 of the Physical Performance Show. Well worth jumping back to hear Jess's development over the years. So get ready with your pen and paper for Adam Didyk Rewired.
Adam Didyk, this is a real buzz to catch up and put a bit of a spotlight on one of Australia's real rising distance coaches. I want to ask you something a little bit fun out of the gate. What's one thing that Adam Didyk is learning at the moment?
I think I'm always learning how to manage people's load better. I feel like it's something that's possibly one of my strengths in the past, but now I'm trying to put some numbers to it and get a real good, accurate viewpoint as to how and why I make decisions that I do, so that I can sort of, probably more than anything, support the athletes to be able to do that little bit more themselves. Too many times I've seen, the charts go the wrong way and we pick up on them too late. So really monitoring that load, helping people to understand how to manage that intensity and volume within their training. And it sounds really simple, but it's one of those key things that helps people stay on the track.
And Adam, we might just hover there, just to break it down a little bit. I'm a physiotherapist by trade, so I have my head in this concept all day, every day, load management. But for listeners who may not quite grasp, what you mean by load, can you break that down and then specifically talk about, how you do measure it with your athletes?
Yeah, sure. I guess it's always been a question in my head as to how we manage and value certain training weeks. And I think anyone who sort of would look at their training and go, okay, if I go out and jog 100 kilometres a week, is that the same as if I go out and run 100 kilometres a week with 2 or 3 intense sessions in it, with a couple of gym sessions, maybe a bit of cross training, and the likes? they're not the same, and trying to get people to recognise that and not just get too obsessed with the number at the end of the week is probably my key thing with coaching at the moment. I'd suggest that the majority of my athletes get that fairly strongly these days and aren't just chasing the Ks, but it's a very easy thing for people to do as they get involved in endurance sport, just to chase the volume of training, and then they sometimes forget about what impact the quality has on them coping and adapting to their training load. I also sort of had the idea a few years back where I had one of my athletes doing a lot of cross training, and I wanted to give a bit of value to it. I mean, it was Jess Trengove initially when she obviously couldn't do her typical training week going into the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, and similar thing happened before Rio Olympics. And to give her the confidence to understand, actually, you're still training a great deal. It's just not all running. So I started playing around with, okay, what would this many minutes on a rower be comparatively to running? What would this amount of time on a bike be comparative to running? So when we added it up, she could see that actually she was still training a great deal, and maybe the running wasn't as high as what we would ideally like it to be. The training volume and quantity was just as high as it should be. And from that point on, I started going, okay, well, how do we actually recognise this within the daily training week? I have athletes who do like doing a bit of cross training, who might value that on their off days. And sort of I wanted to bring that idea and notion in that it wasn't just the Ks at the end of the week that valued how much training we got done for the week. And so it then started, spiralling out of control, really, where I started coming up with matrices to how we and values that they would give me on certain training days. And I'd try to create graphs to sort of manage their chronic load and all the rest of it, to the point where I was still plugging away. But when I was in our holding camp in Florida before we went to the Rio Olympics, I actually met up with Ben Raysmith, who's been the physio at the RAS and strongly worked with athletes in athletics for quite some time. And he was doing a lot of great work in this area too. And I sort of showed him what I was doing. He's going, that's great. And he challenged a few of the points. And he said, this is some of the areas that I've sort of been working on. I was really taken back by what he was doing, and I thought that was great. So I've sort of been working really closely with him to manage load, looking at RPEs daily and all the rest of it. And some of the challenges that athletes have had with some of these things is going, well, this is all good collecting numbers, but I want to rely on how I feel. And that's where we started saying, okay, well, your RPE is supposed to be reflecting how you're actually feeling in those sessions. And they would go, I thought the RPE was how hard the session was. And I said, well, it's supposed to be how hard the session feels, not how hard it should be, because they're two different things. And if your RPE is higher than it should be, then we know the level of fatigue is too high. We know that that's going to increase what your load feels like for your body at the end of the week, and managing it on those sides, those sorts of things. Yeah, basically it's just trying to answer a question: how do we get better at and more accurate at preventing injury from measuring what training load we sort of require to get to our peak level of performance aerobically, anaerobically, and so seeing what is a specific stimulus that an athlete actually responds to. One of my coaches, Sean Crichton, very much sort of put this forward and said, Adam, you're all different beasts. We've got to work out what kind of a beast you are and what you respond to. And I guess these sorts of things helped me to identify what kind of beasts the athletes I was working with were, and how to tune in with their, obviously strengths and weaknesses better. So, yeah, a lot of just playing around with numbers, seeing how it went, compliance and, complete compliance from athletes to actually get this stuff. And that's the hard part whenever we do monitoring. There's no room for missing days of monitoring, as it just skews your results. So, yeah, with working with Ben and looking at different reasons as to why injuries occur, this seemed to be a really good way that we could manage things to keep athletes, minimising the injury risks, minimising, instances of illness. And sometimes the sort of predictions within the charts that we had were so accurate that I could see that someone was going to get sick that week. And, sometimes I wouldn't make a modification, and what would happen? They'd get sick or injured. And so it started to prove to me there was some value to doing this. Whilst some people are more sensitive and will reflect on their monitoring more than others, some will be more accurate with it. You get to know athletes who generally give a slightly higher RPE than probably what it is actually worth, and just working with the athletes to refine this model more and more as we went. I wouldn't say we've got it down pat, but it's a good learning experience, if anything else, to actually learn about the athletes, learn about how we monitor certain periods of load to get a better result and to stay injury free and have good health.
And Adam, I think obviously Team Tempo Run, head coach for your training group. It's an Olympic development squad with some incredible athletes. I think the key thing, for people listening that aren't interested in pursuing the Olympic path but taking the principles from the best in the sport as a coach, the principle is that load is so much more than the volume. Load is also the effect it's having on you, the internal loads, we like to say technically, and that, what happens in the weeks leading into an injury is what matters, not what happens on the day you get injured. It's how you get there that matters. So I think if you're listening in, take notice of how you're feeling, and there's a few tools and we can hook some of those up in the show notes. So that's fantastic. Going back a notch there, you mentioned figuring out what sort of beast you are. Adam Didyk, in my research, you are a bit of a beast. You yourself are a very handy runner. Some of these stats might be out of date, but 31:30 for 10K on the road, 30:36, 10,000 metres on the track, and many others. So can you take us back through your early days and how you fell in love with athletics and running to begin with?
Yeah, they're okay numbers, but they're certainly not what I felt like I was capable of. So I wouldn't say I walked away from my running career completely satisfied with what I achieved. But I guess in the early days it was just doing something I loved doing. And doing something that gave me a bit of confidence because it was something I was, relatively good at to a certain degree, better than my sort of peers at school and all the rest of it. So it was something I sort of held on to sort of, I guess, give myself a bit of self-confidence. I mean, I wasn't the most amazing person in the class or anything like that. So having something I could go out and shine in was a great feeling as a kid. And from that, just the love of it stemmed from that, I think. That was my encouragement. I had a couple of teachers who really pushed me a bit to give it a crack, and I did. But, yeah, just, I still remember making my first state team and thinking, oh, geez, if I don't run again after this, I'll be pretty satisfied in my running career. But it's like anything. Once you do something and you go to a level, you get hungrier to go to the next. So that's basically how my running career sort of evolved. I spent probably the first 5 years of my formal training years as a football umpire doing boundary umpiring with the South Australian National Football League, with ideas of wanting to do AFL, and my brother went on and did that and wanted to sort of follow in his footsteps. But I got to the point where, to be honest, I just didn't really enjoy it. But I loved the training. I loved going out and competing in cross country and on the track. And so it was, soon enough, I was only 17 at the time and decided that umpiring wasn't for me. That I wanted to sort of pursue the running pathway. From there on, I had a coach here in Adelaide, Dave Patterson, who pushed me on a bit further, got me to a point where I was sort of got a bit of interest from colleges in America, and so I decided to go and do that. I only had 1 year of eligibility, so had a bash at the college system for a year, and then came back and probably was hungrier than ever to pursue things. I progressed a bit over in college, but it wasn't the best environment for me, and so I came back. Worked with Rod Griffin pretty soon after coming back, and then moved to Ballarat. Got to train with guys like Colas Birmingham, and a few runs with Mona, and then moved back to Adelaide because I guess home's where the heart is, and sort of progressed there. Started working with Sean Crichton, had a good friend of mine, Dan Matner and Tyson Popplestone, who I trained with. Thoroughly enjoyed running through those years, and I think also just having coaches who were interstate gave me a level of independence to a certain degree where I had to take a bit more responsibility on how I manage things. Having a coach over the phone's one thing, having someone there to make the calls on the day is another, and I had to sort of grow up and do that, and probably helped my training partners to do that a little bit too. In many respects, I probably was always destined to be a coach because I didn't feel like I really had the qualities to be the athlete I wanted to be. And so just went on learning from the coaches I had and continued progressing from that point. As a runner, I got to a point where I had sort of fairly significant Achilles tendon issues, very much insertional. And back in those days, the research and the idea of how to rid yourself of that was minimal. And so I got myself to a point where I was presented with no other option than getting surgery. I had that surgery. It was tough to get back. And during that time, I started coaching one athlete, and that I loved, and started to enjoy that more than my own running. So whilst I got to run with my athletes when I got back from my surgery, I felt at that point, and certainly at the point where I had Jess at the Olympics, and really sort of, I always identify the moment being at the London Olympics as success and failure. Failure because that's where I wanted to be as an athlete, and recognising I probably wasn't going to get there at that point, but success because I kind of recognised, or maybe my calling was more to be a coach than an athlete. So I just decided to follow that pathway, and on the plane ride home from the London Olympics, I pretty much decided that was me done with my running, and I would start focusing more on my coaching at that stage. And I would have been 30 at that stage. I think I turned 31 on that flight home.
midway home. Adam, you said something.
I missed my birthday because of it.
You said something fascinating there, that you felt like you didn't have the qualities as an athlete that you needed. What did you mean? Do you mean just biomechanically or physically with regards to the tendon injury, the Achilles tendon that was persisting, or do you mean in other ways?
Biomechanically, I was actually fairly sound. Whilst I'm pretty picky about my technique, it seemed to be fairly good. But yeah, certainly the injuries were a bit of a disruption. But as you know, with many injuries, you can overcome them with an appropriate plan, and often it's strengthening or discipline to flexibility and all the rest of it. But that's where I probably lacked it. I didn't have the discipline to do those things, and I think I'd gotten myself to a point where I'd probably let my better days go because I hadn't done the right things initially. Again, I was probably one of those athletes who needed some strengthening. And whilst I did some of it, I really wasn't disciplined enough to do it effectively. When I had my year in America, I really was, and I had training partners to do it with. The majority of my coaches weren't really. It's sort of an evolutional shift that's happened in distance running as well. I think we've got to recognise that there weren't many people back then doing strengthening for distance running, and I think over the last 5 to 10 years, it's probably become rather prominent. But you wouldn't find too many elite runners who don't do a strength program. But back in the day, it was you run and you get your strength from running. You might do some core work. That seemed to be a bit of the buzzword back when I was running. Get a strong core. But that's pretty much all most people were doing. There wasn't much resistance work in the gym. And there certainly wasn't much collaboration between a physio and a strength coach or a coach in general to look at some of the areas that need to strengthen up. And I think that's something I recognise. If I kind of had the system I do now and the knowledge I do now, maybe I would have gotten through that period better. But I still don't think I would have been anywhere near an Olympic level athlete. I know how hard it was for me to recover between sessions. I know how much effort that used to require. And I think that's kind of why I required a high level of discipline to get away with it. And I certainly don't. I reflect now, and I don't think there would have been much that would have got me to an Olympic level as an athlete, no matter who my coaches were, no matter what I did in the gym and whatever. There's certain qualities that lend themselves to people who go to the Olympics, and I don't believe that I really had them. So, it's as simple as that, really.
So while you didn't have satisfaction when you did finish, you look back now and reflect with some degree of satisfaction. You just mentioned, Adam, qualities of people that go to the Olympic Games. Can you join the dots, Adam, around Jess Trengove, obviously, who went off to London in 2012 and I believe finished 39th on an Olympic debut there. Can you join the dots on how your relationship started with Jess? What are the qualities that you believe Jess has that makes her now a dual Olympian, and I think finishing 22nd in Rio off the back of a limited preparation in some ways with her stress injury. So what are the qualities you see in Jess, and how did that all come to be?
Yeah, well, firstly, I guess after having one athlete that I was coaching that year that I had my surgery, my wife, who I was dating at the time, her coach had just decided that he was retiring. He had gotten to the point where he had enough. His name was Roger Pedrick, a very esteemed coach, and had been coaching in Adelaide for a long time. And he had a group of athletes, Jess being one of those athletes. And at the time when it all actually happened, Jess wasn't actually she was overseas on a holiday with her boyfriend. The girls within the group, it was primarily a female group, but they were sort of stuck with what they were going to do with their coaching. Roger had agreed to sort of write them a program, but was encouraging them to find another coach to take over the group. I had my wife coming home to me telling who they were talking about, and I got to admit, as a young, naive coach, you always think you can do things better than everyone else. You soon find out it's not reality. But I basically came home and I thought, I'm going to get a bit frustrated here, hearing some of the training they're doing that I don't agree with. And so, naively put my hand up and said, hey, look, I'll take it on if you girls are interested. They had a conversation. They said, yep, we're happy for Adam to take us on. And so I took over the group at that point. There was probably about 10 to 12 athletes in the group. I scared most of them off within the first 12 to 18 months. But Jess came back a couple of weeks after I'd started with the group, and was a bit like, well, who's this new guy that's taken over? Where's Roger? What's going on? Sort of got up to speed on that, and Roger said, no, give it a go. And so she came out and gave it a go. And honestly, there was nothing that impressive about Jess when I first took her on. And I say that with all respect, but it's just because I hadn't seen it yet. We were in the middle of a summer period. They were all training for 800s, 1500s. Jess, being what I would suggest a fairly typical marathoner, was getting left behind in all the reps and all the rest of it. There's one quality that we really noticed of her right from the start was, when we'd be doing our warm-up and warm-down jogs, she'd be keeping up with all the boys while the girls were struggling, quite a fair way behind. And so there was something unique about that within the group. She really wasn't doing much training. She came to me after I asked her to do a 20-minute run between sessions, and came to me all excited the next day and said, oh, Adam, I did the 20-minute run. And I said, oh, good, do it again tomorrow. She was expecting a bit more fanfare, I think. But, it just started to go from there. We started to see her develop quite strongly aerobically. Speed was never her true gift on the track, even though she got away with it in juniors over 1500 and the likes. But as she was getting older, they were getting faster and she was not. But aerobically, there was so much growth happening so quickly. It was just obvious that she was going to go to the marathon. And I said that to her, and I think she kind of laughed at that point. We're still setting her goals towards 1500s for the next season. But we slowly progressed things. And before you knew it, she started progressing within our state champs here for 10K. I think she got down to about 37 and a half minutes and was getting excited by some of the people she'd beat. And I said, look, you've still got a lot more to progress there. You're still on a very low level of training. And we're talking at that point, she was probably only doing about 60 kilometres a week. And then we just gradually progressed. When we got to her first marathon, it was actually a little bit early than what we had planned. With my long-term sort of thinking in mind, I thought, well, Rio's probably going to be a better Olympics for her, but if we can jump up and grab a London experience, then that'll be fantastic. So we threw her into a marathon just prior to the London Olympics, and we had to get her under 2:32. There were already two people who had been qualified quite strongly, Benita Willison and Lisa Jane Waitman. And Jess was the person who chucked a hat in the ring in the third spot, with 2:32 being the qualifier. She ran 2:31.15, I think it was, in Japan on debut, and we were pretty stoked. Like, we were thinking we just pulled off a big heist, because I don't think anyone expected it, and certainly I knew she could do it, but to actually deliver the results, another thing. And that's the sort of thing that I think we sort of start to recognise with Jess. She's pretty good at delivering the result on the day. No matter how fit I get her in training, she can always take it up another level in racing. And certainly the big races, not every race, but the big races, when she really switches on, she takes it to another level. And I think when we look at athletes at that level, there's always something that I kind of relate to as a bit of an X factor with athletes, and looking for that X factor to see what's going to make them better than the people around them is one of those qualities. I wouldn't say that they're generic, and I wouldn't say they're general across all elite athletes, but there's always something that is incredibly strong with an athlete, and for Jess, it's her ability to take it up a higher level than what we'd generally see in training. And I'd probably say that gap between training level and race has probably closed a bit. Her training level is actually quite impressive these days, and that's probably why her performance continued to progress. But even with someone like Madeline, Madeline had an X factor that was just, her ability to be able to, some of her training sessions just phenomenal. I remember getting her results, because she would often train early in the morning before she'd go to work, and so she'd be training at 6 o'clock in the morning, and she was based interstate to me, so I'd wake up and have her splits on my phone when I woke up, and looking at her, eyes almost popping out of my head, going, wow, that's impressive. And I'd have the guys in my group doing the session the same night, and I wouldn't want to tell them what she'd actually run, because many times they were hard-pressed to run faster than what she was running in her reps. So her ability to be able to do some phenomenal training sessions shows me there's still a great deal of progression there for Madeline, over the coming years. So I still don't think we've seen the best of her if she can continue to progress and get things right. And currently working with Jared Talent, it's the same thing. I even asked him, I said, what's your X factor, Jared? And he goes, I just think it's my ability to be able to grind out the really tough training sessions. And I said, that's That's good. So what's your X factor in racing? Because it's generally something that gets them prepared well. There's something in competition. And for a guy like him, it's just his ability to stay so calm on race day that is what's impressive in him. So, like I said, each of them have their own X factor. They're not general across the board. They're specific to the individual. When you see that strength, it's generally, stands out quite a bit. So, yeah, outside of that, it's just getting the work done, making the right decisions. It's no good having all the talent and not being able to make the right decisions at the right time to make the most of it.
You're listening to Adam Didyk, Team Tempo Run coach of now Commonwealth Games marathon champion Jessica Stenson on this Coach's Corner Rewired episode. Support for today's show comes from Polar. Polar have recently launched 2 stunning new generation running watches, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro. Engineered specifically for running, the Polar Pacer and the Polar Pacer Pro are equipped with a variety of functions unique to Polar, providing personalised guidance and support across the entire runner's journey, from the first steps to the marathon and beyond. The Polar Pacer Pro, well, that's the running watch for those who want to run better. It's one of the most powerful and sophisticated running watches ever built. It's ultra light with a high-performance core processor, including an extensive suite of advanced training tools that will help serious runners improve their running economy and performance. It has built-in navigation and running power, and it debuts at an incredible $499. The Polar Pacer, well, that's the watch for those who want to fall in love with running. It's an ideal running watch for those who are starting their journey as runners, embodying the simplicity of running with all the essentials, plus the specialised training, sleep and recovery tools needed to fall in love with the sport. The Polar Pacer, it helps runners get started at $299. So if you feel like it's time to beat your best, jump across, shop Polar over at polar.com. Support for today's show also comes from our upcoming live stream event, Positive Sports Psychology, Cultivating Deep Wellbeing, with positive sports psychology researcher and mental skills coach, Rory Darkins. If you are looking to level up with your sports psychology and your mental skills around your performance, then do not miss this live stream event. It's taking place on the 10th of September between 3 and 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. There will be a post-event recording for all registrants. Tickets are $49 Australian available over at physicalperformanceshow.com, and topics covered will include well-being, how do we measure it, the links between well-being and performance, along with practical strategies for optimising well-being, and live Q&A time with Rory Darkins himself. So once again, jump across to physicalperformanceshow.com to secure your ticket. And for our patrons of the show, you will receive your complimentary access as a small way of saying thank you for your monthly support of the show. If you'd like to become a patron of the Physical Performance Show, you can do so. Jump across to Patreon, and from just $5 per month, you'll receive complimentary access to our back catalogue of live stream events, and of course our upcoming live stream events, including Rory Darkins's on the 10th of September 2022. For now, let's jump back with Adam Didyk on this rewired episode of the Physical Performance Show, sharing on his coaching, strategies, tactics, and now very obvious success with Jessica Stenson, knee Trengove, just securing the Commonwealth Games marathon title on the weekend.
The elite performance, you're looking for that X factor really for any maximum performance, no matter what the athletic potential. Adam, it comes back to there's got to be a bit of X factor there. With what would you say the top 3 characteristics, so Adam, for optimal physical performance, whether it's a beginner looking to over time mature into their best PBs for their own satisfaction, wherever someone's starting, what does Adam Didyk, Team Tempo Run coach, believe the top 3 characteristics for physical performance, broadly speaking? I think in general it's being smart. Like I often say, there's no rights and wrongs in running. There's just smart and dumb. You've got to have reasons for why you're doing what you're doing. And a lot of people get carried away. They want to do more. They want to run harder. You've got to ask the question, why? Why are we doing this? And you've got to ask the other questions, have I adapted? Am I ready for it? And
they're the key things. So having gradual build-ups, not buying into what you read in a magazine or the training program you see, posted on the internet. Focus on what's right for you. I think that's the overarching principle to training. And I do work with a lot of recreational runners at the moment. I have a business called Tempo Run Coach, and within that, I have people say, I'm running a marathon. How many 35? Do I need to run 35 kilometres? How many of them do I need to do? And I say to them all the time, you do what you can actively get yourself to. So what you can progress to. If you can only progress to 25 kilometres and that marathon day is looming near, then that's the best you're going to be able to do in your preparation. If you give yourself a bit more time and gradually get yourself up to be able to run 35 kilometres, then that's great. Sometimes for some people it's more. But at the end of the day, people who force things that they're not ready for is probably a key principle that I see broken more often than not, or doing something because they've heard this is what I should do as opposed to what's right for them. So I'm always very conscious of that for people going forward, that they don't get caught up in what everyone else is doing. Just worry about what's right for them and progressing from that point.
So being smart, brilliant.
Yeah, just be smart, make the right decisions, don't get caught up in the emotions of it. And that's a big reason for why coaches get involved. It's, a lot of stuff that I know about training is not, I would say, too much in advance of what a lot of my athletes know about training. But, in many respects, sometimes I can see the wood for the trees and keep the bigger picture in mind. And athletes are very, there's a lot of very smart athletes out there with their training. They know what the right and wrong thing to do is, but they get caught up in what they want to do or what they feel they have to do as opposed to what's right for them. So, when the big competition's coming up and they're trying to squeeze that last little bit out before they taper, sometimes that's where it all goes horribly wrong. So they're the times where I'll put the cotton wool on them a little bit earlier and just go, okay, do we need to be doing this? When we've got people, with I have athletes who come up to me and say, look, I'm really stressed at the moment with exams and all the rest of it. Okay, so we've got to recognise that's actually part of our weekly load, because this week's not the same as last week where you were on holidays or the rest of it. You've got to keep the whole big picture in mind and not just what numbers are presenting on your training program.
So that's great. So one would be smart and avoid those pitfalls. What would be the other two? Just broad concepts. Be smart, top performance.
Always look at your training program as being written in pencil. Has to be adaptable to what you can do. Any training program has room for modifications, and it's something I've always struggled with. Some athletes who go, well, that's the best plan for me, I've got to do it, but the best plan is the one that suits you. So going back to that early principle, I guess if we were to number them and list them out, look after your general health and well-being. There is a lot of research around well-being, but the other parts of recognising what gets you to the line and what gets you to absorbing your training, having good energy availability, so sleeping well, eating well, monitoring your health and psychological well-being. Those sort of stresses can be big issues for people getting through their training, adapting to their training, even can be precursors to injury. Managing that load, as we've discussed, working on your weaknesses, not just focusing on what your strengths are, and being honest with yourself as to what you need to do. That's why I keep saying don't get caught up with what you hear other people do. You've got to find out what's right for you. I don't know if I've answered your question that cleanly, to be honest with you, Brad.
Adam, that's very clear. Being smart, have your program in pencil, and general health and well-being. Adam's top three. You mentioned something there, Adam, energy availability. As a physiotherapist that works pretty much all the time with endurance-type athletes, this is such a big thing. The energy availability, particularly for growing bodies, with regards to bone health. As a coach, can you sort of put your take on the energy availability side of things and what it means for young athletes and even mature athletes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to me, it's a crucial part of any training. So, if you're not ready to do the training, you shouldn't be doing it. And if your body's not coping with it, again, you shouldn't be doing it. So, the keys to, when we talk about recovery, sleep and nutrition take up about 90% of the keys to recovery. We can do all our foam rolling, we can do massage, whatever you do for recovery, at the end of the day, sleep and nutrition are going to take up 90% of those. So unless you get them right, then you're playing around with the 1%ers that aren't going to make a great deal of difference. With developing athletes, I'm very conservative, certainly with female athletes as they're developing. As we're well aware, there can be some long-lasting effects there to athletes who get injured and depleted during those years. So I'm very conscious of that. Same with male athletes. I'm very conscious of them not recovering, and I would present probably as a coach as someone who does things more on the conservative end with our developing athletes. But even with the senior athletes, you're better to underdo it sometimes than overdo it. You don't know the long-lasting effects of some of those injuries. I do monitor that energy availability with my athletes. They do they do list how many hours of sleep they have each night. And back when I was doing that initial monitoring that we talked about, I used to actually get four critical bits of information from athletes before they started training. And it's only because I've evolved this concept that I don't do it anymore. And the first thing I'd ask them to do is give me a number out of 5 for these next 4 areas. And one was fatigue, so how fatigued they are. So if they're feeling really tired, then it's a 5. If they're feeling great, it's a 1. Soreness was another area. Stress was another area that rank out of 5, and health was the last one. So let's say they're getting a bit of a sniffle or whatever have you, that might be a 3 or a 4. If they're really sick, they're at 5. And so what I generally do, how to classify this, is I'd go, okay, if they were over 15, so between 15 and 20, when I added those 4 numbers up, then it was a straight away, no, you're not training tonight. You're certainly not doing the intensity of the session. If it was between 10 and 15, it was generally my license to modify the session. If it was below 10, I'd be fine with it. But it was just a way of learning and getting that feedback from the athletes on those daily sort of opportunities to sort of see how they were coping. And I would actually record this in my own spreadsheet. So I'd write down all the numbers, I'd go home, and then I'd start looking at what some of the averages were. So we'd get a few trends as to, okay, look, they're always fatigued through this period. Okay, maybe the training load's too high. Maybe they're not sleeping enough. Maybe their daily lifestyle is quite taxing, and we need to recognise that within their training load. So with kids at school who are going through exams, when they're gone from studying so many hours a week to doubling it in their swap back and all the rest of it, we've got to recognise that all takes a toll on an athlete. So their energy availability is not what it should be. So we put them at risk by persisting through those times. Yeah. Just a number of key areas there that you can monitor quite easily, to get some good feedback from the athletes. And honestly, it's something that even as athletes, they can do it themselves. They can go through those numbers and go, yeah, I'm actually not right today. Okay, I'm going to give my coach a call and say, hey, this isn't going well. Same with the recreational runners. If they've had a massive day at work, 10, 12-hour work day because it's a very busy period, just don't expect the same level of performance at the end of the day.
Clearly, you know a thing about getting runners ready to pace a marathon well. Jess, who we previously spoke about there, just ran that beautiful 2:26.31 on the Gold Coast Marathon only a matter of weeks ago. What would be your advice to marathoners looking to get their best marathon time laid down with regards to pacing? Yeah,
look, I think you get rather well prepared for a marathon by exposing yourself to that pace fairly regularly. In the final sort of 10 weeks of a marathon prep, I put a lot of the training and refer to it as plus or minus marathon pace, so that they really tune in with it. At that, you sort of get to know where your body stresses and what's going to be reasonable to do. So as you're building up your training, sort of expose some longer efforts so you can get an idea as to how hard you're working at certain paces. Look, to be honest with you, I think it's actually easy to do it with elite athletes, but at the same time, you're probably running a finer line of getting it correct. With recreational runners, I guess that, for many of them, their first key is to try and make the distance. So pick something that's actually reasonable, that you're confident you can run the distance with, and you may even pick up in the second half. But those who have run a few marathons, you're probably tuning in on what's appropriate for you within the races you've done, and you start setting target times around that. So when you've sort of got a target time in mind, go and expose yourself to that sort of training pace regularly, and don't feel that it's the pace you have to do all your long runs at or anything like that. But sort of go out and do some marathon pace efforts for 12 to 15 kilometres, and I think from that you have the confidence to go with it. We've done numerous things with someone like Jess and Jack Colreevy. Sometimes it's valid and very accurate, other times it's not. But we used to do something where we'd do 3 5-kilometre efforts, about 3 or 4 weeks out from marathon, and this I've sort of shared many times. But ultimately, what we'd try and do is a middle 5K, we'd try and do it at what our target marathon pace would be. And the first 5K would be 5 seconds per kilometre slower, and the third one would be 5 seconds per kilometre faster. And the general sort of tip as to why we do this is we collect the heart rate data, and at the point where I'd sort of, the first one should be fairly comfortable, second one should stress a little bit, and if we got it right, the last one will stress it a little bit too much, and we'll see the heart rate sort of spike up through those periods. If the heart rate spikes earlier, then we probably know that, in the second one, then we probably know we're a bit over ambitious and we need to go that one step back to the one beforehand. So it gives us a bit of an indication. And we've done this most times before a marathon, not every time, but most times, and it's generally shown to be fairly accurate. For Jess, especially, Jack, we've sort of had a few questionable sort of test results, but I generally, with someone like Jess, get a few of our guys in just to pace her so specifically to that pace and make sure that we hit it so that we can learn a bit about how she's operating at that pace. So, you can use something like that to guide your pacing, but ultimately the biggest key that people talk about these days is having a marathon pace where it's steady throughout the whole thing. The typical thing that we see with recreational runners is they slow significantly in the second half, so that probably suggests that we're getting a bit over ambitious in the first half. So settling that down, maybe being a bit conservative and going, well, at halfway, if I'm feeling like it's too easy, I'll push it from there as opposed to the other way around.
Yeah, and I've certainly experienced the pain of pushing that first half too soon. That's for sure. Too hard. That's for sure. Tapering tips, marathoners, before we move off the marathon. What are the important things, Adam, that you think recreational runners of varying abilities need to keep in mind with regards to a taper, whether it's a marathon or a half marathon or their key events?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the typical thing in Australia is, you do your last long run 3 weeks out for your marathon. I've played with that concept a little bit, depending on the length of the prep. But, and I think that's almost like a sign of, okay, we're now on the run into the race. So we don't need to expect that we're going to get significantly fitter in those last 3 weeks. So I always say you err on the side of caution those last 3 weeks. You're going to do much better by maintaining the level you're at than to try and push that little bit more and rock up with a niggle on the day, or to get sick within those last 3 weeks. So, generally the way I approach it is that last long run does happen pretty much 3 weeks out. That next week following, the training intensity stays relatively high, but the volume drops just a touch. And that's 2 weeks out, we generally start to drop the volume a little bit more, and the volume of the intense sessions as well. And then that last week, we don't try and make any gains at all. We just try and freshen up and just keep the legs turning over. So our final week looks fairly light for most people. I mean, typically what we'll do, let's say the race is on a Sunday, I'll sort of start off the week. I think it'll be like 60 or 70 minutes on the Monday, then drop it down to 50 on the Wednesday, 40 on the Friday, and then 30 the day before. And the sessions that we do on the Tuesday and the Thursday are 6 by 2 minutes at half marathon to 10 kilometre pace with a minute recovery. And then 6 by 30 seconds off for the Thursday session. So they're fairly light, really. I mean, we're not trying to get any physiological gains from those sessions. What we're trying to get is just the ability for the body to freshen up, but not get us to that point where we're feeling lethargic because we haven't done much during the week, which is why we still turn over with a little bit of intensity.
Yeah, some great principles. Adam, as a coach, a fun little question here. What's your favourite session to dish out, and what's the one that you don't like dishing out? It's a hard question, I know.
Look, I mean, I always love seeing athletes run hills, so I enjoy seeing them do hill reps. And we vary depending on the distance of the athlete that they're training for, from 150 metre efforts for our middle distance runners, and even sometimes our longer distance athletes will do some short reps to that point depending on the time of year. But at the moment I've got our longer crew through the middle of winter doing 2 and 3 minute efforts up a hill. And then they sort of float back down and go again. So I love seeing the strength shown by the athletes late in the session. So, there's nothing much to see in the early days, but seeing them really commit to to getting it done at a good quality and seeing them tough out the last rep is fantastic. And one K reps as well. I mean, let's be honest, as a coach, those sort of sessions are not that exciting. It's just exciting to see the strength and the consistency from an athlete. So that's what I like to see there. I do like seeing track sessions because they're probably I'm a little bit more involved with the timing and feedback. They can go pear-shaped pretty quickly, so when you're putting them on that intensity. But I do enjoy the athletes doing that. But yeah, to be honest, I don't use sessions with complete regularity. I do try to change it up. So often there's probably about 3 or 4 key sessions that get repeated, but more often than not, the training session always changes. The one that seems to get the most grizzles and groans, and it's because it's quite tough, is what we sort of refer to as a lactate clearance session. And it's something I honestly pinched out of a magazine article that Steve Magnus wrote many moons ago, and it basically, developed. We used it specifically in half marathon prep, and we built it up from 800 on, 800 off to getting the pace sort of progressing in both areas to 1K on, 600 off. And it goes for, we do 8 cycles of it. So, you got 8 miles of it in the end. So what's that, 12.8K or something like that. And so athletes sort of grizzle about that one because it is quite tough. I've seen someone like Jess run through the 10K mark of that session in, 34 low. So, and at that point, she was only really running 33.5 for a session. So the intensity that brings to that session is really rather an uncomfortable session. But I've seen so many great gains made through a cycle like that. So even though I love seeing them done well, it's a feared session by many of the athletes in our group. They don't seem to like it. So I've almost had to find other ways of doing it just so it's not such a mental barrier for them. But I'm now being told, hey, we're okay with it now. We're tough enough to deal with it now. You can put it back on the schedule. So they might start seeing it appear again. Yeah,
brilliant. Adam, I know this is a bit like asking you to pick your favourite child. You've got 2 beautiful boys, but what's Adam Dydyk's one piece of advice, if you could only give one piece of advice to people generally to perform at their best, one bit of advice, what's your solitary bit of advice going to be?
Good question. Yeah, you're right. It's like choosing your favourite son. Look, I would just say do what you need to do because it's right for you. And I think I've used that theme a few times today, but it's a reason why someone like me has a role as a coach, is because we're trying to find what works right for that individual. So don't just try and copy and do the generics. Try and find what's right for you. Play with it, discuss it with your coach. Find better ways of doing things and be innovative in that regard. So don't just do a session because everyone else is doing it. What is it? How are you going to make the most out of that run, out of that training session? Even in my group, I see, 4 or 5 different styles and approaches from athletes who dare to be innovative with trying to find a way to tune into what they want better. And they have those discussions with me and we follow it through and see what they can do. So, yeah, be innovative, be creative, tap into what works best for you.
That's very sound. Adam, final question here, and that is a fun one. If you could have dinner with 3 people, who's at your dinner table? They can be living or past, and why? A bit of a fun one.
Actually, this came up reasonably recently because one of the guys I'm trying to tee up a coffee with, and that's Bruce McAvaney. I think just because I've been such a fan of athletics and I see someone who's been to a lot of, high-level athletics, historical events in athletics, in Olympic Games, and interviewed some of the greats, I think it would just be a phenomenal person to have at a dinner table to chat to, and I reckon it'd be a great conversation. I think that would allow me to just be a fan of athletics and have that conversation. I'd have to always say my family is probably before anyone, but if we're sort of removing the family component to it, and we're looking at are we living or
living or past, Adam?
I am a big fan of the Olympics, always have been. Grew up as the kid who would read all the Olympic books and all the history on it. So let's go with a geeky one and say Pierre de Coubertin, who started the modern Olympic Day movement. I'd love to sort of chat to him to sort of it now and find out if it's gone on in the way that he wanted it to be. Obviously there's great ideals and fundamentals, but are we still true to all of those is something I'd love to see. And can I go one fictional?
You can have anyone you like there, Adam. I'm intrigued.
All right, I'll go with Harvey Specter from Suits. Started watching the show and thought, this guy's my hero.
Wow.
I need some of those qualities. So, I'll put Harvey Specter on the table.
What a table. Bruce Baccavani, Pierre de Coubertin and Harvey Specter. That is a mix. Adam, Team Tempo Run. If listeners want to find out more about, the squad, your athletes, where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, we've got all of our social media channels sort of operating. So on Instagram and Facebook, we don't do heaps on Twitter for us, but you can follow myself, and I generally post a bit on there. We've got a website, temporuncoach.com, and that sort of operates to service my recreational running business called Tempo Run Coach, which sort of supports people who maybe just want some technical running work with one of our coaches, Andrew Beck, to those trying to do their first marathon, first park run, whatever have you. So from beginners to advanced, and then Team Tempo's within that classification. So that's our elite running squad. Yeah, that's the best place to contact us, and those who are looking for coaching can always contact us through that website as well.
Brilliant, and we'll tag all that up, listeners, in the show notes. But Adam, you mentioned there, the team. I've always heard such glowing reports from athletes and anyone that's ever engaged your squad on the culture within it. What are the key cultural pillars that you have in place?
Look, I think it's in the name that we're a team. I had a strong interest in group dynamics going through university and did a bunch of extra studies in that. So I've put a lot of those group dynamics and team cohesion principles within what we do. And I guess one of the key things is it's, you're there for each other to get the most for yourself. So, we look for consistency from everyone so that your teammates can expect you to be out at training, can expect you to be supporting them. One of the things I've always sort of used to describe it is saying, okay, in a competitive sense, we all want to win the race. But if we can't win the race, if we don't have that performance there on the day, then we damn well hope that one of our teammates does a job for us. So everyone sort of feels that one person's success is the success of the whole team, because we all buy into that quality. We all buy into the fact that we're all part of that environment and making it positive. So if you're just the guy that comes out to training and in the warm-up and warm-down cracks jokes and makes people want to be there, then you're just as valuable as the person who's pushing them to get that final rep out when it gets tough. So regardless of the level of performance you have to give to the group, you can still add a lot to it. So, and I think that's right why we've got a rather diverse group, and we encourage it to be rather diverse. And whilst we sort of look at the elite side of it, we certainly don't feel that anyone else has little to offer. We think that anyone who comes into that environment's got a lot to offer. So yeah, they're probably that's the key pillar, I'd suggest. Brilliant.
And physical challenge for the week. Every guest has a mandate to issue a physical challenge to our listeners. What's Adam Didyck's physical challenge going to be?
Good question. I'm going to make it as simple as possible. I'm going to say go out and run a kilometre as fast as you can, and then compare it to the best runners in the world to see what level they actually maintain for something like a marathon. So when you see someone, it's quite impressive when you see marathoning at the top level to see them running well under 3-minute Ks, and then you try and run a 3-minute K and realise what it takes, and these guys are doing it back to back and making it look easy. So there we go. We'll make it very simple and straightforward. Run a kilometre as fast as you can.
I like that. The 1K effort challenge from Adam Didyk. Adam, I know you've got a lot on and your time is valuable, so thank you for stopping with us today to share just some of the many pearls of wisdom you've learned through your career to date, both with your own running and also your coaching career. And I believe you're off now for a bit of physio with a marathon prep coming up. Which marathon's it going to be?
Still to be decided. I am taking a group over to New York Marathon this year. So my hope is to do that, but my wife is the priority to run the marathon there. So if we take the kids, I'll be on dad duties, and otherwise it might be Melbourne. So we'll wait and see what I can prep for, see what I can get through.
Well, all the best with your marathon prep and the remainder of the year. So thanks again.
Thanks, Brad.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust and I know that you enjoyed Adam Didyk Rewired. It really is one of the great Coach's Corner episodes from the 6-year history of the Physical Performance Show. If you're yet to follow Adam and the team, jump over to Team Tempo Run over on Instagram. Whilst there, be sure to tag the show in. If you're going to do a podsy, that's a screenshot of the episode that you're enjoying at any moment in time, and tag the show in at Physical Performance Show. You'll find me over on social at Brad_Beer if you have any feedback regarding the show, perhaps a guest suggestion. Now, if you are a distance runner or endurance athlete struggling with bone, tendon or joint related concerns, then our 45-minute online telehealth consultations have been helping runners and triathletes worldwide getting back to their physical best for the last several years. You can schedule your online telehealth consultation over at pogophysio.com.au with myself or any of the Pogo Physio team. Don't forget to secure your registration for Rory Darkins' upcoming live stream event, Positive Sports Psychology, Cultivating Deep Wellbeing. Jump over to physicalperformanceshow.com. Massive thanks as always to the great folk who make this show possible: Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin, show administration, Matthew Olding, show graphic design, Milan Borrow, videography. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we are going to explore the world of continuous blood glucose monitoring as we speak to some of the Super Sapiens team around their device and why it can be so instrumental in optimizing endurance sporting performance outcomes. So until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.